What's up, guys and girls, and welcome back to a new video. Today we have Ryan Schutter here, who is the lead UI for Stormgate, Frost Giant Studios' newest game. And we'll be asking a couple of questions from the YouTube comments. I, of course, have some questions myself as well. And whatever comes up in the interview will come up. So, first of all, thanks so much, Ryan, for your valuable time. And did I get the name pronunciation correct, as well as your title?
So lead UI UX designer.
Okay, perfect. And what does that mean for the people that do not know?
Yeah, so what that means is I'm primarily focused on user interaction with the game, both inside the game itself and outside of the game in the menus and things like that. Just the general experience that people have coming into the game. How are they going to learn the game? How are they going to move through the menus? How are they going to, place buildings and make units and things like that?
All right, first question, not necessarily related to your field, but as yesterday the cinematic was published at the Summer Game Festival, the website for the beta sign-up crashed. Is that a feels good moment or a feels bad moment?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to say, but I'd say that it's probably in the feels bad category more than feels good. It is nice to have people so interested, but we absolutely wanted to have that website available for people. So, yeah, a little bit of a rough start.
It's nice to see that you got a fair bit of attention and some love for the RTS genre in general. So let's jump to questions our YouTube audience submitted. But first, as a side note, I will paraphrase some questions a little bit, so it might not be the exact words you guys used in the comments. And we start off with a question from a user called Evergreen. Lower the skill floor, but increase the skill ceiling is something we have heard a fair amount out of Frost Giant and for Stormgate. How is that exactly possible? And do you have some concrete examples that you can give?
Yeah, absolutely. This is getting right into it. This is basically the meat of my job. This is what I'm largely focused on. My focus in UI is on things like how do we onboard players? How do we tutorialize players? How do we get people to want to bring in their friends and things like that. But also, how do players interact with the game itself? How do they build units? How do they train units? How do they select units and things like that? And those are critically important. We know that we don't want to completely change the way that people are used to interacting with these things from StarCraft 2. We want people who come to our game to basically already know how to play if they knew how to play those games. But we also want to make it more approachable for new players coming in, or for even just people who understand StarCraft 2, but want to play maybe at a little bit of a higher level without having crazy APM or things like that. So we want to make it a little bit easier for those players to engage with strategic content or decision making more than mechanics early on. Mechanics, we want to push more towards the advanced player rather than the new player. Because one of the first things we see a lot of people telling, new players coming in is, hey, you really need to go and work on mechanics first. You should just only do this one thing for the first 3 months that you play the game. And, and we really don't think that that's a spectacular experience for people coming in. So we would rather that those players kind of work on those as squeezing out the last, 20% of the value that they get out rather than the first. And so we're really looking at tools and ways that we can help make that happen. One of the things that we're working on is something that we call the quick macro panel. I don't know if that'll be continued to call that, but that's what we've been calling it internally. And this is something that you've probably seen some form of in other games, but basically it allows you to build a building or train a unit without having to select something specific first. So in the game, and you'll have tabs above or to the left or below. I'm not sure where they're going to end up just yet. We have a few different versions of the UI at the moment, but there's going to be some tabs near your command panel.
Just to be sure, the command card is the thing in StarCraft 2 in the bottom right with the move, attack, patrol command, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's and just to give it even a little bit more context here, there's different names for the different parts of the UI. There's the unit info panel. That's where when you select a unit, you can see information about that unit, or if you select a group of units, you see all those units. There's, of course, the mini-map panel, and then there's the command panel, which has the command card on it. And that command card is somewhere near it. There are going to be tabs, and those tabs are going to say build, train, upgrade. And when you click on, say, the train tab, you'll be able to see all of the different units that you can train right now. And if you click on the build tab, you'll be able to see all of the different buildings that you can build right now. And you'll be able to say, click the build tab and then click on your supply building and then place that building. without having to go and select a worker first and then go into a submenu on that worker and so forth. This is really something that's important for helping teach new players the game, because it removes a bunch of steps that we have to teach them when they're first coming in. So we don't have to teach them like, hey, the first thing you need to do is go and select a worker. And then the next thing you have to do is go into a submenu on that worker. Instead, we can say, click the build button, then click the thing you want to build. And when you place that building using this tool, it will automatically find a worker to go and build that building. It's going to grab that worker, it's going to send them over to build it. They're going to build the building, and then they're going to return back to what they were doing. That's really important because most of the games that have kind of done this in the past, they don't actually have workers. You just place a building and then it kind of just builds on its own. And there's some significant challenges with making that happen. But this is something that we think will make it much easier to both onboard players into the game, teach them through tutorials. We no longer have to describe like 5 different steps. Instead, we can just say click this, click that, and very clearly they can learn how to do these things. But also for players like me who maybe don't play at the highest level, I'm like a platinum level player at best, on my best day. You know, they can engage with some of the higher strategic level play by using this system to sort of minimize the sheer volume of clicks and things that they need to do in order to make basic things happen. But the way that this doesn't lower the skill ceiling is that it really is a fairly inefficient way of doing some of these things compared to what a really high level player might want to do. So for example, if you're trying to place your first expansion, your natural, especially early on when you have a lot of extra bandwidth for your, your APM or whatever,
Right.
because you don't have a huge army, you may want to go and send the worker to the expansion spot first before placing that building. So you can do that. You can grab a worker, you can move them to that location, and then you can select that worker and build just like you would in, say, StarCraft 2 or Warcraft 3 from within that worker's command card. You can build that building. And that means that you can wait for the exact moment that you get the resources rather than having to wait for those resources before ever sending the worker out, which means the worker's walking all the way over there, wasting a bunch of time before they build that building. So the highest level players will be wanting to interact with this in the most efficient way possible, which will be to play closer to the way StarCraft 2 is, but they may still engage with the quick macro panel at different times when they're overtaxed and the other things that they're doing.
Yeah. Now, I've learned as a young man that whenever something sounds too good to be true, you're either part of a pyramid scheme or you're being tricked in a potential timeshare. So which one of the two is it? Because it sounds like a very good solution to a relatively difficult problem that a lot of RTSs have. Why have we, example, not seen something like that in StarCraft 2 or in Warcraft 3? Like, what's the problem?
I think that there's some amount of maybe things just hadn't evolved to this point yet, but we do actually see this, as I mentioned earlier. You do see this in other games. It's just usually those games don't have workers. It's particularly challenging to achieve when you have workers, and I think that's probably a big part of why we haven't seen this too much just yet. Basically because the behavior of workers when doing this is incredibly important to get right for it to feel natural and to feel good to players. So for example, which workers can actually be pulled to go build a building? Can a worker that is mining, let's use StarCraft 2 resources, for example, can a worker that's mining minerals be pulled? Probably. That's probably okay, right? But what about a worker that's mining gas? That's maybe that's okay. Maybe if there's no other workers available, that's okay, but maybe it should prioritize one mining minerals first. What about a worker sitting next to a bunker with auto repair on or something like that?
Or scouting.
Right, exactly. How much weight should proximity to what you're doing have for what if a worker is building something right now and right next to where this building is going to be, and he's about to finish that, there's all kinds of, this is a difficult, and we may not actually be able to hit all of these cases perfectly, but we really want to build as natural feeling a system as possible for those players who want to engage with this or who would use this, which we expect to be like newer players and lower level players or more casual players. But yeah, this is something that we see as being a great tool for onboarding those players. And the challenges with it are primarily the complexity of the prioritizations and behavior of workers around base building specifically. Training units and upgrading are much simpler, but yeah, base building gets quite complicated due to the workers.
One of the things I actually really like about this quick macro panel is that it doesn't just higher the skill floor. It's a lot easier for people to get into it. But also in a later game, in very high level games, we can see a shift of priorities. So rather than having to spend 3-4 seconds in a 25-minute game in the late game, building your building, selecting the worker and sending it back, perhaps priorities can be on more important things, and we'll see cooler things. Like if there are things to do within a game in that later stage, they probably should be more interesting than selecting the correct unit or selecting the correct worker to build the building there. And I think it opens up for a more army focused and a more strategic and a more positional type of late game, rather than also having to really care still about the base building aspect. I'm not sure yet if I really like that, but it's just an interesting thought that I didn't really come up with during the interview. I also guess that this quick macro panel isn't the only thing, as earlier I had an interview with Monk and he mentioned automated control groups. Can you tell us something about that?
For sure, yeah. Let's talk about automated control groups for a moment, because this is something that I've really wanted to do for quite a long time, and I think that they're really going to help make it easier for players to play the game and manage the game, because control groups are something that are really difficult to teach players to do. It's like, hey, guy, now that you're playing this game, after we just told you to select your worker and then go into a sub-command card of that worker and then go and build this supply depot or whatever, now we're going to teach you how to select a bunch of units and then hold control and then press a number on the keyboard, and now you need to reuse that number. Like it's a lot to teach people through a tutorial process and for onboarding. So automated control groups are really powerful for us because they allow us to teach those players, hey, press the 1 key to select your army, press the 2 key to select your support units or something like that. Basically, every time a unit is trained, it will be automatically placed into a control group. So whenever a unit gets produced out of your barracks, so it's a Marine, a Grunt, or a soldier, or whatever it is, it will automatically be placed into the number 1 control group or the number 2 control group. And then as you play the game, you can always press number 2 and know that you'll be selecting all of your Marines or whatever they are.
And I hope that this is some kind of opt-in system and that you can also customize the hotkeys you'd like to use.
Yeah. What the customization will look like is somewhat unknown right now. I know we have the ability to allow you to customize it completely, but we have to decide what is right for the game as far as the level of customization, because we don't want to lower that skill ceiling too much. So we want to get a feel from we want to, over time, through people play testing and doing user research and having pros play and stuff like that, we really want to get a sense for what their feelings are on being able to fully customize this. But in an ideal world, I think we would have it be totally customizable, where you have a menu where you can pick a hotkey, and then you see a list of all the units and buildings that you can make, and you can just toggle them on for that hotkey. And then whenever one of those things gets produced, which means you could also have it where you could have Marines going into 2 different control groups potentially.
Sorry, I have one more. Would this also be the case for buildings?
Yeah, absolutely. You could totally use this with buildings. I think for non-customized versions of this, we probably wouldn't use buildings. Primarily because the quick macro handles a lot of the things that buildings would be normally doing. So we would want to leave more of those hotkeys open for those players. But if you were like a super high level player who, for whatever reason, wanted to have buildings on a specific group rather than using the quick macro for that, then you could totally do that. Okay. It makes no difference to us whether the thing's name is Marine or Barracks or whatever.
Yeah. No, obviously, just making sure. Here, after some thought, I'm actually not sure again whether I want everything to be customizable or whether everything should be customizable. I think there is something special about having to add your units in a group, but at the same time, there is no real reason why I find that special. It's an annoying task to do, especially for buildings at the start. If you could preset these, my Nexi in StarCraft 2 being at 4, my Robos being at 6, is that really a big issue? It's a single action that doesn't happen. It helps a lot. I think it's probably just a good change. But somewhere deep down in my heart, there is some elitism. There's something that makes me want other people to suffer the same things that I've suffered. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing for RTS, if that is the thought that you have coming into it. But sometimes I can shake that feeling. So I figured I'd just put it out there. Our second user question is from Klee 98, and he asks, what did you learn from watching pros and casuals approach RTS games? So perhaps the question would be two parts. First, the casual, and then the pros, and then the difference you approach that for, especially the UI.
Yeah, I think I've spent a lot of time standing behind people at BlizzCon watching them play StarCraft 2 for the first time, and that's always a painful experience because it's really not. It's not something that's easy to just sit down and play for the first time when you have like a 30-minute window on like, it's
not your own PC, a weird keyboard, yeah.
yeah. It's not. So we have spent a lot of time looking at that, and we actually have done some user research early on at Frost Giant. Full Sail did a user research pass for us on people onboarding into RTS games, which was really useful. And we actually got to see like people playing and kind of like talking through their experience playing, what they were confused about, what was going on, and things like that. And that was very useful for us. But some of the really common things that we see is like people will come into the game and then they'll like move the camera somewhere away from their base and not even know that they've done that or that they need to move it back or things like that. Like really basic stuff, like even more basic than what like people are thinking about. I was just talking about automated control groups, right? Like teaching people control groups is so far from the new player experience actually that like we have a lot of problems to solve before we even get there. And so we really are looking at things like reactive tutorialization, where like we detect somebody has moved their camera somewhere bad and they haven't moved it again, so maybe we need to prompt them and be like, hey buddy, you moved your camera somewhere bad. Sometimes it's easier to do things like just lock the guy's camera on their base at the beginning, but that's not conducive to learning how to play the game. Because you don't want to be changing the rules out from under people while they're learning to play. That's not super great. And that's why some of the onboarding things that we had in StarCraft 2, things like you can't select enemy buildings, the simple command cards, stuff like that, like they might be useful for helping a new player, but at the same time, there's no smooth transition out of them.
Yeah.
And we really want things that there's a smooth transition out of. That's why quick macro is so great, because of that example of like, well, you know what? I've got a lot of bandwidth at the start of the game. Maybe I'm going to send my worker before building the expansion so that I get the most efficiency out of it. That's a transition moment for a player to go from like, I purely use quick macro to now I'm doing a little bit of like deeper interaction with the game. And then over time, they might be adding more and more of those deep interactions. And so when we're approaching this problem, we really want to create those transition moments. And things like just forcing the camera to be locked on their base at the beginning is not necessarily the best way to approach that, because then once the player learns that they can move the camera around, it's like a totally different set of rules almost for how the game operates. So we want to be a little bit careful about that. There'll still be moments where we need to lock the camera in the campaign, or maybe at the very beginning of the tutorial or something like that. But as soon as we give them that freedom, we want to make sure that we have those reactive tutorials in place that are like, hey, you did this thing. You might not have meant to do that. You may not understand what you just did. Here's how to fix it. Hopefully, we don't have a game that requires us to have a ton of that stuff, because that means that we probably have other problems. But we know that we don't want to fundamentally change the way that people play, like a Blizzard style RTS game. So this is something that's going to come up. Like we're expecting similar types of problems to what we see standing behind people on the BlizzCon floor, watching them play StarCraft the first time. So we will be doing a lot of user testing throughout the process, and we will be creating these sort of reactive tutorials in order to adapt to that. So that's for the new players. For the really high level players, I mean, obviously we've spent a lot of time watching StarCraft 2 esports. So we get a lot of insight into what high level play looks like and things like that. And I think that for me, a big part of what I was talking about earlier, which is we want to take the mechanics part of the game, like lots of making as many efficient clicks as possible, trying to do everything in the most maximized efficiency possible. We want to like push some of that mechanic stuff a little bit later in the process of learning to play the game. And I think that that's where we really want to see as much skill expression and like high level players shine. We really want them to be able to separate themselves out by having those really strong mechanics and pushing those things. So it's incredibly important to us that we actually preserve those so that people can engage with them and become a better player.
Some good answers already here out of Ryan. And sadly, that will be it for today's part of the interview. Of course, we have another 40-ish minutes or so with Ryan, in which we ask the hard-hitting question, will there be LAN?
This is a very controversial topic right now, actually, within the team.
So if you want to see that part of the interview as well, be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and of course, leave a comment down below as well. Love to see it. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little interview, and bye-bye.